Something seismic just happened. A move so bold, so sudden, it caught Washington completely off guard. Beijing didn't just throw a wrench into America's chip dominance. It drove a wedge through the heart of U.S. tech leverage. Without warning, China issued a sweeping directive to all its companies: immediately halt the purchase of American-made semiconductors. Full stop. No exceptions. No appeals. Overnight, the once dependable artery feeding billions of dollars worth of U.S. chips into China's massive technology ecosystem went ice cold. And it's not a bluff. The consequences are already unfolding. Inside the White House and across Capitol Hill, alarms are going off. And at the epicenter of this unfolding crisis is U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, a billionaire turned public servant, a man once celebrated as a market whisperer on Wall Street. Now he's navigating a global firestorm that could unravel decades of American tech and trade policy in a matter of months. What triggered it? In Washington's eyes, it was a clever maneuver. After years of tightening the screws on China's access to cutting-edge processors, Donald Trump had just approved a loophole chip, Nvidia's H20, a custom-designed GPU made just weak enough to meet U.S. export controls, but still powerful enough to satisfy Chinese AI firms. The thinking was cold and calculated: sell the chips, rake in revenue, and slap a 15% export tax on every transaction. The U.S. Treasury would skim billions. Nvidia would keep its most profitable client. China would stay dependent. A win-win-win, or so it seemed. But Beijing didn't just say no. It said never again. Not only did Chinese officials immediately cancel H20 orders, they issued a blanket order to terminate all purchases from major U.S. chip makers, including AMD and Nvidia, cutting off two of America's crown jewels in one swift motion. Then came the next blow: new government regulations barring any U.S.-made chips from being used in state-funded tech projects. A red line had been drawn, and Washington was standing on the wrong side of it. This wasn't about specs. This wasn't about performance. It was about dignity. It was about control. And above all, it was about independence. Beijing is making something unmistakably clear to the world. China is no longer willing to be held hostage by American technology. What was once framed by U.S. policymakers as a strategic victory has now been transformed into a very public, very costly humiliation. And the implications go far beyond just one chip or even one sector. This moment marks a turning point in the global balance of technological power. Let's be honest, this didn't happen overnight. For more than a decade, Washington has deployed a long-term strategy designed to stifle China's semiconductor ambitions. The approach was bipartisan. Admin after admin, Democrat or Republican, the rules were simple: restrict China's access to high-end chips, deny exports of vital design software, ban sales of lithography tools, and stop Chinese firms from acquiring critical infrastructure. The goal was to slow China down, to keep it from catching up. But while America was building walls, China was laying foundations. Hundreds of billions of yuan were funneled into China's domestic semiconductor sector. Entire industrial cities were built around fabs and foundries. Chinese universities exploded with STEM programs focused on materials, science, nanoengineering, and photonics. The country treated chip independence not as a business objective, but as a national survival imperative. Yes, the early results were uneven. There were missteps. There were flops. But there was also momentum. And over time, it became clear: China was closing the gap faster than Washington ever expected. By the time Trump launched his all-out trade war, tariffs, sanctions, blacklistings, the fuse had already been lit. The U.S. hoped the pressure would force China into submission. Instead, it triggered a national acceleration. What began as a decoupling strategy quickly became an innovation race. And in many respects, China is now pulling ahead. Entire Chinese supply chains have been overhauled to remove American components. New startups have been seeded with government backing, and local giants like Huawei and SMIC are producing increasingly capable chips using homegrown architectures. Beijing has proven it can outmaneuver sanctions, and more importantly, outlast them. By 2023, the U.S. realized its own companies were paying the price. Nvidia, Qualcomm, Intel. These were titans, now bleeding revenue because their biggest customer was boxed out. China wasn't just a major buyer. It was the biggest and often the most lucrative. Losing access wasn't just a bad quarter. It was an existential threat to future earnings. So Washington pivoted. The H20 was floated as a compromise. A chip just barely hobbled enough to meet U.S. controls, and with a tax added to give it political cover. The idea was to give China a taste, but keep it dependent. China didn't take the bait. Why? Because by then, the landscape had changed. Beijing had just rolled out AI systems like DeepSeek, trained and deployed on Chinese hardware. And they worked. The myth that China needed U.S. GPUs to build world-class AI was shattered. That's when the calculus flipped. From Beijing's perspective, the H20 wasn't a deal. It was an insult. A deliberately weakened product, sold at a premium, with a Washington-imposed toll baked into every unit. The message was clear. Here's your tech, but only under our terms. Beijing's response? No thanks. The rejection wasn't private. It was loud, deliberate, public. Chinese firms were told to cancel American chip orders across the board and build the future with domestic or friendly alternatives. And the world was meant to see it, because this moment isn't just a trade dispute. It's a declaration, a statement that the unipolar tech order is over, that China no longer intends to play by American economic architecture. And the fallout? It's just beginning. Look at Apple. In 2023, nearly 1 in 5 of its global dollars came from China. But that's just surface level. China is also where Apple's supply chain lives, where components are sourced, where factories assemble, where logistics are fine-tuned for global release. If Beijing cracks down, Apple takes a double hit: lost customers and broken operations. Nvidia's exposure is even deeper. Chinese companies once bought entire shipments of GPUs for AI and data centers. Without that market, Nvidia risks losing tens of billions over the next few years. The AI boom in the U.S. was fed by those China sales. Without them, growth stalls. Qualcomm? 64% of its total revenue came from China in 2023. Most of the smartphones running Qualcomm chips aren't even sold in China. They're exported around the world. Pulling that thread unravels Qualcomm's entire global strategy. This isn't theoretical. It's financial reality. And every day that chip orders stay frozen, another billion in revenue vanishes. Scott Bessant knows this. Insiders say he's urging the administration to recalibrate, to open talks, to find some off-ramp. But here's the problem. This isn't just about sales. This is about trust. And once that's broken, it's not coming back easily. Even if some short-term deal is patched together, the long-term trend is clear. China is diversifying away from American tech, and other countries are watching closely. Because if China proves it can run advanced systems, power AI, and build infrastructure without U.S. chips, the rest of the world may start asking, why can't we? And that's the most dangerous outcome of all. Not just the loss of revenue, but the loss of influence. For decades, America's tech edge has shaped global norms, licensing deals, encryption standards, platform dominance. If China succeeds in building a parallel system, one that's robust, scalable, and untethered, then the U.S. won't just lose sales. It will lose control. The narrative will flip. Washington won't be the gatekeeper of technology anymore. It'll be one option among many. And while that shift might seem subtle today, it could redefine the global economy for decades to come. America's superpower status has always rested on more than just military might. It's rested on the ability to set the terms of commerce, innovation, and digital infrastructure. Chips are the foundation of that power. Now, for the first time in modern history, another country is challenging that foundation head-on, not with rhetoric, but with action. So here we are. The U.S. is staring down the possibility of an irreversible shift in the tech order, triggered not by missiles or treaties, but by a quiet, bureaucratic order issued in Beijing. No threats, no shots fired. Just a single sentence that may change the future. Stop buying American chips. And with that, the balance begins to tilt.